Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about the state of Discipline Priest heading into 10.1 and recapping some of the recent changes that have gone on. Now, some of you may already know this, but the tier set, of course, has been redesigned once again. So Shadow Repaint and Purge the Wicked are having their damage increased by 25%, same as usual. Now, Radiance's healing is increased by 15%. The 4 set is wonderful, but some people kind of misinterpreted it. The 4 set is always making your Power Word Radiances last 3 seconds longer, or your Atonements from Radiance last 3 seconds longer. And now your spells have a chance to cause your next Radiance to be instant cast and cost no mana whatsoever. Now, this does not give you a free charge of Radiance, it doesn't reset the cooldown of Radiance, it just means that when your Radiance returns to you, it is going to cost nothing when you have those procs. The amount of procs that I got was every 12 to 16 cast or something along those lines. I think it was around like 60 or 70% of the Radiances that I had access to were instant cast and free, resulting in some massive mana savings at my disposal. There also was some massive changes just happening tonight. Now, last night, if you're watching this video, where Holy Nova's damage has been increased by 30% across the board, and they have some notes, and I believe these are going to be hotfixes going into live servers 10.07, but it's naturally going to affect the spec in 10.1. They talked about how mana consumption has been out of line for Disc for quite a while, so they're reducing the mana cost of Power Word Shield. We can zoom in a little bit here. Now it's 2.4% of base mana, and Power Word Shield's now absorbing more damage, which is a huge point because there are kind of areas where you wouldn't really care to press Power Word Shields at all, for whatever reason. Renew, also costing less mana, and fixed a bug causing the healing that Renew did to not be increased. Now Radiance also costs 4.5% of base mana. So the, 3 or 4 times out of 10 that you would actually have a Radiance that you'd have to spend mana on, it's also costing a lot less mana for you. And for our holy friends, Holy Fire and Smite damage getting increased is always going to be a wonderful thing for them because they honestly really needed it. Getting back to the point with Disc, this is kind of funny that this change happened tonight because I was just thinking after we finished the latest wave of raid testing that Disc is looking a lot better when it comes to the Aberris 10.1 raid when it comes to its mana. And now it's going to be even better with these recent changes. It's also going to be a little bit odd because it's going to mean that you're going to have so much mana at your disposal to cast excess renews, to be able to very aggressively use your Radiances, and mix in Shadow Covenant basically on cooldown to be able to pump up huge healing with your ramps. What this really ends up meaning from the tests that we've done so far is that your mini ramps, where they usually would just be expending both charges of Radiance and that's about it, are now going to be a lot more aggressive. Pretty much every time that you're going to use those 2 charges of Radiance, those excess Radiance charges, actually you'll have like 3 or 4 of them in between each raid ramp, you're going to have the ability, if you'd want, to use lots of renews, to use Shadow Covenant almost on cooldown basically, and constantly be pumping out extra damage, extra output as a result in between your main Rapture and Evangelism ramps. This is going to be a huge benefit to the spec, but at the same time, mana concerns are one thing, but the overall output is kind of going to be another. It seems like with these 2 changes, it's sort of like one hand doesn't know what the other is doing at Blizzard, where they made some great strides to improve Disc's 4 set, to improve mana, and I'm not even running this busted mana trinket on the public test realm, where some people are. It's giving way too much mana back. But even when I'm not running with Innervates, and I'm kind of playing a little conservatively, not constantly slamming Shadow Covenants, not constantly using lots of renews, I still have so much excess mana to the point where I feel pressure to be able to pump out extra renews and extra cast of Shadow Covenant to be able to ramp up my output, even when we're, 4 or 5 minutes into these fights, because a lot of the fights, when you look at them for 10.1, are blitzes. They're very fast, rapid fights that healers just need to turbo blast output. And as a result, I am very excited about where Disc is going, but it also kind of brings to the point that they're making all these changes to give you longer atonement durations, to be able to give you more access to your mana, but it seems like we're really kind of just lacking in overall atonement output, but they don't want to buff that and instead they're kind of doing everything but buffing your atonement number, which is quite a large point of frustration. I've detailed in my last video about how it feels like healers are very powerful, very strong, and they kind of push up health pools in an instant. And what we've seen so far with the Aberrus Raid is that we're scaled to, let's say, like a little over where we're at in Mythic Vault of the Incarnates. And you're getting like, what, 5 or 6 eye levels, I think, for the testing. You're like 426 or maybe even 428. And for fights like Rashek, where that's going to be like the Kurog type 5, it's going to be like boss 5 or 6 in the raid. It's going to be pretty decently deep. We're hitting these intermissions and we're hitting these like absorb effects. And I know they kind of tuned things down a little bit for the testing, but they're putting up like these mass absorbs that need to be healed through, or there's pulses of damage which are already hitting us for 60-70% of our life. And our health is just constantly sort of like yo-yoing back and forth. And now what this means for Discipline in particular is it's great if you're able to constantly be able to have more atonements out and be able to have greater sort of mini ramps in between your Rapture and Evangelism cooldowns. But if every other healer is also at a point where they're fighting and just trying to like snipe everything out to be able to max out their output overall, and it doesn't really seem like healers are sort of like battling against the boss instead of just battling against each other. The sort of system where you need to be able to lean on large-scale cooldowns to be able to be mana efficient and to be able to sort of space out your mana over lengthy encounters, over challenging encounters where it's difficult to top off a health pool, those days are very much gone. And now Disc is in this position where it almost feels like I'm playing with like an Ashen Hollow whenever I'm ramping these days. Where I'm like, I will do great healing as long as other people are not trying to burn their mana bars down around me or stack another cooldown on top of mine. And in encounters like Rashek, there's about an 8 or 9 second intermission phase. It might even go to 10 seconds. But there's always so much damage that you just are piling on raid cooldowns on top of each other just to ensure that after every pulse of damage, everybody is at 100%. And then the next pulse of damage goes out, and then you get put back to 100% in an instant. And this sort of healing meta is just survival of the quickest, almost. And this is going to be a little more forgiving for Disc because you're going to have longer atonements, and you're not going to burn half your mana bar for every ramp that you're putting together. But on the other hand, it's still going to put massive emphasis on just being first, on perfecting those timings to be able to hit your Light's Wrath at the absolute most fantastic, phenomenal time. And there still is a lot of juggling between buffs and debuffs and different spells that the spec needs to be able to deal with at the moment. You're still going to be going into the next raid, playing with Shadow Covenant, playing with Expiation, constantly refreshing your Purge the Wicked uptime, especially when Purge the Wicked is also getting buffed and dealing quite a bit more damage with your 2-set. And so all of these things together still mean that the level of complexity for the spec is at an all-time high. You're juggling between like 9 or 10 different damage abilities, as well as the debuff of Schism, the buff of Shadow Covenant, applying your atonements to begin with, figuring out fight timers, figuring out your cooldowns in relation to everybody else's, that you're still putting out a lot more work than everybody else. And so while it feels great to receive these buffs, I also don't want to take away from the point that the spec is at this massive level of complexity, which can be incredibly frustrating when you're also trying to learn new encounters and also kind of enjoy new encounters and see what the hell is happening, but you're always so fixated on trying to weave between shadow and light, make sure your Shadow Covenant use is at the most optimal time, that it adds on all these frustrations that, yay, we might feel a little more powerful, but is all this work and all this effort that we're putting in going to result in a commensurate payoff, you know, a proportional payoff? And in my opinion, I'm still not quite at that point, and I'm still not sold. I would vastly prefer if the incoming changes for 10.1 included something to push a more Wrath Unleashed kind of build that would not want to have Shadow Covenant at all, and would instead encourage lots of light spells so that you could sort of have this shadowy build for dungeons, and it be encouraged to be able to run with that. And then you have a very light and Wrath Unleashed base build that would encourage lots of light spells and almost entirely light spells. But at the moment, it looks like the disc build for raiding is going to be taking every single different damage option except for like mind games and then weaving it all together into this unholy stew that each player needs to figure out. At the moment, it feels really overwhelming for a lot of new players, and it's a very unwelcoming thing, I would say, for a lot of new players. I was doing like a dummy disc build with my testing, and as much fun as I had playing with it, there still are a number of fights where you just can't really afford to be playing it because there's so much strength in a lot of the shadow resources and things like Expiation and Shadow Covenant and Twilight Equilibrium Weaving that you kind of just need if you're going to be pushing in a cutting edge environment. I might do a video on a dummy disc type build if you guys are really interested and don't mind a bit of an HPS loss for a bit more simplicity. Let me know. But otherwise, I like the direction the disc is heading, but it seems like it's a little too slow, and it's also kind of hitting other problems than I think that the spec really needs to have focused on right now. But let me know what you guys think. Hope you all enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe for more, and I'll catch y'all next time.